Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome Rabbi Ozar to our new Drisha Wintersman. Is that where we are now? I think so. Oh,
It's
Springsman.
great.
Sorry, just kidding. Time is a blur. Um, so welcome to the first week of Springsman 2024 at Drisha, where we have the pleasure of learning with Rabbi Alex Ozar. Uh, and we're going to be learning about community, pluralism, and difference in Halakhic practice. So as I was mentioning, just in case anyone's coming in as I'm speaking, I'll be inviting people to be panelists. That will just allow you to unmute and ask questions, or please raise your hand before you do that, or turn on your camera so we can see you, which would be lovely. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat, and I will relay those to Rabbi Azar. And just please try and stay muted when you're not speaking. And also for anyone who's watching with us on Facebook, you are welcome to put questions in the comments on Facebook, and I will relay those as well. So Rabbi Alex S. Ozar is a rabbi and co-director of the OU JLIC program at Yale University, where he recently completed a doctorate in philosophy and religious studies with a dissertation entitled "Some Are Guilty, All Are Responsible: A Theory and Ethics of Prophetic Citizenship." He holds a BA, MA, and rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University. His writing has appeared in the Harvard Theological Review, Journal of Religious Ethics, Dine Israel, Jewish Quarterly Review, Torah Umadah Journal and Tradition, and thelayerhouse.com. Two answer. And we'll be learning, again, the title of this class is Community, Pluralism, and Difference in Halakhic Practice. We want our communities to be as open and inclusive as possible, but communities require shared understanding and standards. Through a range of Halakhic case studies, we'll build a conceptual vocabulary for the complex work of community in face of deep difference. Who can and should we daven with, and how? Who can and should we dine with, and how? Who can and should we learn with, share a home or neighborhood with? What will emerge from our studies is a clear-eyed vision of the challenges and opportunities of togetherness. So I'm sure Rabbi Ozar has his own introduction to the class. I'm very eager to get started. Just one more technical thing. I will be putting the source sheet in the comments, in the chat, sorry, that's what it's called, on Zoom, and as well as in the comments on Facebook. So if you'd like to follow along there, you're welcome to. And I think, Rabbi Ozar, do you want me to share my screen with those sources? Do you want to share your own so you have control over it, or
Yeah, I'll probably figure out how to share my own screen.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'll be sharing those in the moment.
Thanks.
And yeah, thank you so much for being here. And over to you, Rabbi Ozar.
Great. Thank you so much, Chaya. It's really good to see you again. Chaya is an old partner in crime. And oh, yeah, I got very big on this screen. Oh, I don't want to just see a huge square of my face.
You can change under
Change it back to
view.
gallery. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much to Chaya for facilitating. Thank you so much to the Drisha Institute for the entire platform and all the background support, and for making this wonderful project happen. They've got an amazing slate of wonderful classes. Highly recommend people be as engaged as they can be. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and just grateful, honored, feel very blessed to have all of you here learning with us. As I said earlier, I completely understand you want to have your screen off, taking care of other things. I would be if I were in your shoes, but warmly invite you to turn on your screen and engage face to face, to ask questions. I will also said I personally have a lot of trouble paying attention to things on Zoom. I'm going to try to keep these sessions relatively brisk. And like hopefully under the hour mark, but please do feel encouraged, invited, welcome to ask questions through whatever medium. You can try the chat feature, try to get Chaya's attention, try to get my attention, to start waving, gesticulating on the screen, whatever it takes. Okay. With all of that throat clearing behind us, to the topic, I always introduce this with following the penalties. Okay. I was introduce this topic and related topics with a quote from Schopenhauer. I'm not going to get the quote exactly, but he says human beings are like, we're like porcupines in the winter. That we get cold, and so we want to draw close together for warmth. But as we get close, we start to feel warm and comfortable and safe and secure. We start to poke each other, and so we pull away. But then we get cold again, and so we need to pull in and find our warmth and comfort again, and so we draw closer, and then we start to poke each other again, and so we draw away. This was Schopenhauer. This was this deeply tragic vision of the nature of human relationship and community. There's the fact of the matter is, on the most basic level, human beings, we're always inherently social. We're dependent on each other for simply staying alive, and certainly for any form of flourishing. We need each other. And we'll always be drawn to each other. But on the most basic level, we will always, on some level, threaten each other. Everyone will always feel, on some level, some measure of anxiety, insecurity that the other person will somehow swallow me up, destroy me, threaten my own pursuit of happiness and just being, and vice versa. We'll always be, and I'll always know you feel that way about me, and I feel that way, even though we couldn't possibly articulate it. And yet we need each other. We want to be each other. And then to the extent that we are sharing a life together, we're close, and we're sharing this. We're sharing space and time, and so we're sharing resources. We're each going to have some vision or understanding of how our world ought to look. We're sharing this stretch of land, we're sharing this water, this fruit tree, we're sharing a house, we're sharing a community. Each one of us will, as individuals, have some picture of how things ought to go, what things ought to look like, how we ought to conduct our affairs, because we're different people, and we're attracted to each other precisely because we're different people. If I were self-sufficient, we wouldn't need others, but I'm not self-sufficient. I need other people. I need the facts. I need them in their difference, and so I'm attracted to them in their difference. But then they're going to have a different view of how the world ought to be, and that is always going to cause friction and discord. We're always going to run into this problem where we need each other, and yet it's not so simple to figure out how we're going to carry on the work of community together. And then precisely to the extent that we want these relationships and the communities that we create with each other to be communities of genuine depth, with this real relationship, maybe intimacy, where there's something actually going on between us, we'll want the communities to be about something. If there's something we're all committed to, something we all share, a set of values and meanings and purposes, a kind of mission. And the mission may just be our sharing a life together, and our sharing a life together well, and our doing the hard, complex work of figuring that out together through some kind of mutual regard, respect, and love. But and to the extent that we're aiming at something like deep relationships with this real meaning, because it's not simply atoms sort of bumping off each other with mechanical forces, but we're attempting something like relationship. So then that opportunity for depth, or what's required for personal depth in relationship, is precisely what will generate the sites of discord and enmity, where the more we're invested in in pursuing the good, and some vision of the good, what we believe in and what matters, and we're trying to unite and create community around what we see as mattering, true value, precisely to the extent that we achieve depth on that front, then our disagreements will be all the more higher stakes. It will matter all the more that we get it right. And then the fact that you disagree with me about what it means to get it right will matter all the more and become all the more difficult. And again, just going back to Schopenhauer, so we need each other. We want each other. We want to have relationships of depth and meaning and purpose. And so we're always going to try to draw in and make that real, but that's always going to bring us to the challenge of then needing to pull back and then dive back in, and then pull back and then dive back in, as we work out through time in a kind of just rhythmic back and forth how we are going to make the work of community actually work. This is actually reflected in Kabbalah, and especially in modern Hasidus. There's a term that's used in the depiction of the Merkava, the divine chariot, of Ratso Veshov. They're angels moving back and forth. And so there's a vision of the relationship between the human being and God is described in terms of attraction and then repulsion. We're drawn close to God. We want closeness and cleaving and togetherness. But as we get close and through the longing and yearning and love, as we get close, we start to feel threatened. We start to feel insecure, and so we pull back. But then we feel cold again, and we need to draw back in. One of the main theses that I want to put forward into the set of studies we're going to do over the next 8 weeks is that this dynamic is actually finds expression in the halakha itself. As we're going to engage, look at a series of case studies of instances where Chazal in articulating or are addressing legal questions around who can and who can we not include in various fora. Who can we allow at our table? Who can we allow in our shul? Who can we allow at our study table? What kinds of people pose threats to what kinds of community? As they're working this through, there will be a kind of rhythm where there's at first, it's the reverse of the dynamic I was describing earlier. There'll be first an attempt to articulate clear boundaries. Say these people are in, these people are out, with clear legal definitions. And then over time, as you see the laws, the bottom line statutes and the halakha worked through in practice and actually brought into real life, you start to see the equal and opposite impulse, where there's then a softening and a drawing of people back. So there's first the move to push people away and to say, you have to be outside. But then there's always, you start to see, well, we need to figure out how we're going to include them again, how we're going to bring them back in, how we're all going to re-achieve or redirect ourselves, reorient ourselves towards community and closeness and togetherness. And so there are, I mean, thinking about the question of inclusion or inclusive or open communities generally, this can become a kind of slogan. A lot of institutions talk about themselves as big tent institutions. I work at a Hillel, which is a very proudly pluralistic institution. We make a very big deal and we mean it, and it's real, that we want to include as many people as we can, as many varieties of Jew, as many varieties of human beings, as many styles of being in the world. We want them all to genuinely be there. But part of what I want to say is that this cannot just be a matter of slogans in one direction or the other. You can't just say you are an exclusive community, or you can't just say you're an inclusive community. The most exclusive communities need people, and the most inclusive communities will also always need to draw boundaries, again, precisely to the extent that their community is about something ordered towards value and meaning. There will be somewhere where they'll draw lines because somebody at some point is going to threaten those, is going to threaten what matters to that community and threaten the community's ability to engage in community around what matters. And so what I want to aim at, this is a kind of, you can do this you find this in philosophy, you find it in Halakhic literature itself. Is a style of writing, a style of thinker, where you're aiming at a sort of comprehensive theory of everything, where you want, ideally you'd have a computer that could take in all of the data, ask all the questions perfectly, and then produce an algorithm that would tell you, so I'm in a situation with the following factors, and I have this question about, should I include this group, should I not include that group? And then the algorithm, having you fed it all of the data, the algorithm has processed it properly, and the algorithm would tell you what to do in this situation. You'd have a single mechanically applicable or formally applicable formula. And whether it is because I'm not brilliant enough to do that, or because this is the way things actually just are, I'm aiming at a much more ad hoc, eclectic approach. What I'm looking to do is, and through looking at a number of individual concrete instances where this has been Jewish experiences from our past, where we have confronted these kinds of problems, to try to drive a set of lessons. So I want to isolate a clear set of factors, variables, so that when we encounter a situation, we can say, oh, it's got this factor and that variable, and they're interacting in this way. And I've seen something like this before. There's certain patterns. And then not a solution, not a formula, not an algorithm, but a kind of toolkit that says, given the kinds of variables in play and the kinds of dynamics, here are the kinds of approaches that have worked in the past. And now it's still going to be open-ended and creative, and you're going to need to work on your feet and take responsibility for what you're doing. You can't just say, I'm following the formula, because there is no formula, but you'll be more equipped to do that work on your feet. Okay. And so in any case, where the question is inclusion or not, pluralism or not. So we need to know, and what kind of community are we talking about? What are the values of the community? What are the values that are threatened by these particular people? What's at stake in those values being threatened? And then we're going to need to know things like, again, who are these people? How important is it to us that they're a part of our community? How important? What's at stake in saying that they're in or they're out? What would we lose if they left? What are we stand to? What's at risk if they stay? And then there will be gradations. So we may say that we can have them around in this scenario, but not in that scenario, or we can have them in this space, but not in that space. And there are ways of drawing lines that, short of full exclusion, that allow kind of exclusion that maybe even point towards a progressive, greater inclusion over time. And so now, just for the last time, to go back to the very beginning, what we're aiming at, again, is not a single formula or map or structure, but something much more dynamic. We're aiming for a kind of jazz rhythm, a feel for the flow. And to be able to know how, when you hear the drummer doing this and the bass player doing that and the sax player doing this, you know what your part is. And it's still going to be creative, but you'll know how you're interacting with the various parts. And this, as I said, is reflecting a structure of being that is fundamental to divine and fundamental to creation and fundamental to what it means to be a human being. Okay, with all of the background, what we're going to do tonight is examine one particular instance where you see the kind of dynamic I was gesturing towards. Where there's an initial move to say we need to draw clear lines, and these lines will be have statutorily clear application. They'll be legally formalistic. We'll say there's a line here, a boundary. These people are in, these people are out in the following scenario. And then the impulse, then, in light of real scenario and real human relationships, to try, without threatening the legal categories, because those are fundamental and we need them for structure and to define our community, without threatening them, figure out how to sort of fill in the gaps of the law with a kind of relational love and a dynamic love, and dynamic relation. And I think we'll okay. Let's we're gonna dive in. If you look in your source sheet, and I'm going to pull it up here. I'll pause quickly if there are any questions, reflections, objections. I said a lot of words. Great. So Lindsay, like these are the basic questions. And I will just say, I meant to say, Lindsay asked, how do you maintain the integrity of the culture of halakha while aiming for inclusion? What are the halakhic implications of challenging norms while remaining within a given community? So these are going to be our topics. We're going to look at one little slice of that today, in a very narrow instance of what it means to say we can overlook the fact of transgression for the sake of inclusion and relationship and community, and as we're going to see, family. I am going to attempt to share my screen. Select a window, share. Okay, can everyone see this? Great. So we're going to look at a tshuva responsum from Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein was one of the probably the preeminent posek legal decisor in mid to late 20th century America, the world generally, but it was a major figure in America. Originally from Russia, sets up shop in yeshiva on the Lower East Side, And from there, he was 8 volumes of published responsa and innumerable students, and it dramatically shapes the landscape of Orthodox Jewish life in the United States. This is actually a tshuva responsive from his time in Russia. I don't know, he may have been in Belarus at the time, I don't know exactly where he was, but he tells the story of a time he visited Moscow. So actually, we're just going to do the beginning of this to set it up, and then we're going to go back and sort of reconstruct the path to getting here. But I want to set up the frames. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and translate it, and you have the translation under here. The Luban, I think this is a place in Belarus for the last time I looked it up. Biyotzi b'Moskva. He says, I was in Moscow. Vishnat Tafresh Sadi Dalid. I looked this up. It was in 1933. Nishalti bedavar. I was asked this question. Sheha avot nizonim bimdina hazot. The fathers. This could have been mothers too, but I think my wife pointed out to me. I was confused about this. Pointed out to me the reason why it's specifically the fathers is because the mothers know how to cook for themselves. But the fathers they're provided sustenance. Harabim, on account of our many sins, al shulchan b'nehem uvnotehem, on the table of their sons and daughters, ha'ochlim nevelot, who eat non-kosher meat. The kol davar isur, in every form of prohibited thing. The rubam, the majority of these children, Haim kofrim b'Hashem, they're deniers of God, they're atheists, uvetorato, they certainly deny the law, say halakha is meaningless, there's no application anymore. V'shavki hetera v'achli isura, this is a technical phrase, that they relinquish permitted food in order to eat forbidden food. So the scene is the Talmud describes two different types of mumar, apostate, or just sinner. And one type is a mumar l'te'avon, somebody who sins on account of desire. So this is, I walk into the room, I'm starving, there's a delicious looking steak sitting out on the table. It's just, and I cannot withstand the temptation, and I just have to have a bite, and I just sit down. I know it's not kosher, but I sit down and eat. So that's the mumar l'te'avon. And that will have much more limited application in general for halakhic purposes, because we understand it's situation specific. This person is fundamentally committed to halakha, they're fundamentally committed to the law. Just everyone falls prey to their temptations sometimes. Everyone has urges, everyone, and you have moments of weakness. That's totally normal. And so this doesn't say anything more broadly about your commitment to halakha. But then in this, the phrase he's using depicts a scenario where I walk into the room and I'm starving and I see two steaks and they're both identical. People are vegetarians, make it it's a perfect looking cake. And they're both identical. And I just stick with the steak. Both prepared by the best chefs, and they're both equally enticing. And I see it, and I see the kosher one, and I push it away so that I can get to the non-kosher one, because that's the one I want. And so here I'm eating the non-kosher one, not because I'm tempted to, because I had the exact same experience and pleasure and need satisfaction available to me through the permitted one, and I wanted the non-kosher one anyway. So Ramosha is describing somebody who commits transgressions for the heck of it. They've complete disrespect and proactive, subversive disrespect for the law. And this is, he's describing these people's children. Beam came. If so, they cannot be trusted with regard to prohibited things. Meaning these are not trustworthy informants. That's a weird word. I'm not sure what the right. They don't have standing to tell us whether or not a given food item is kosher. So now I walk into the room and I see the steak and I don't know if it's kosher or not, and I want to ask my son or daughter, is it kosher? And is it? And then the claim is that if I ask them, no matter what they say, or they say it's kosher, I can't trust them because they don't care if it's kosher or not. They may just be saying it to make me happy in certain scenarios. They may be saying it to me, saying it's kosher because they want to sell it to me, make more money. Or they just want to make me happy. Whatever it is, there's some reason why they want to tell me it's kosher, but there's no reason to think that they're telling me it's kosher correlates with its being kosher, given that they don't care about it being kosher or not. And they would gladly eat it even if it the Eila Avot, and so given that that's the case, that these poor elderly fathers who are dependent on their children for food, they can't trust their children who are all radical communist atheists, heretics who violate the law with, with abandon. So basar, and then the weak and elderly fathers, they have no recourse. They have no way to eat meat, and sometimes you need to eat meat for your health, Moshe says. They also, by the way, can't eat anything cooked. Even if you say there's a technical rule that is very helpful to know, you're trying to keep a kosher kitchen, it's actually work as a rabbi. We encourage people to ask questions about when there are mishaps in the kitchen, whether the thing is kosher b'diavad post facto or not. The answer is virtually always that it is in fact kosher. You don't need to figure out because stam kalim einam b'nei yoman. Because we assume if you have, say, a meat pot, it's unlikely that it was used in the last day for meat. So even if you cook dairy in it, the fact that it's more than a day, hasn't been used in it more than a day for meat, it doesn't affect the milk. And if also same thing if you had a non-kosher pot, and you cooked kosher food in it, it wouldn't make the food non-kosher if it's been more than a day, at least in principle. And so he says, so look, maybe there's this technicality where you could get around this. You just assume that they never cook things in pots that have been used for non-kosher food that day. Mikol makom, but nonetheless, and here he makes an interesting move. He says, Harihu l'chachila. So there's a distinction in halakhic thinking between scenarios, the translation is ab initio, l'chachila, from the get-go, which means how would we set things up if we were in control of the starting conditions under an ideal scenario? How do we want things to be? Versus what I was just describing is b'diavad. What happens when the thing has happened already? Do I need to throw it away? Or do I need to accept a loss? And we'll obviously have a much broader set of allowances and be much more relaxed when it comes to the b'diavad question when something's already happened. But Rav Moshe says this is the father who's going to live with the children who don't keep kosher. This is kilachachila. This is setting up a situation ab initio. And so we have to get this right. We can't just say every single time they cook a meal, well, they've already cooked it, so it's fine. No, he knows they're going to keep doing it, so it's always going to be beforehand. So how does he stop them from cooking in the non-kosher pan the next time? If this is his life plan, then we need to get the life plan right. And so we need a solution to this problem, Rav Moshe says. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second. Just invite anyone to articulate the problem here, the challenge we're confronting, both on the personal level and then how it's in the relational level, and then how this problem is being generated by the fundamental commitments in play. Okay, so I want to note here is we have this conflict between, on the one hand, formalistic legal categories. The legal formalism says that the children in this scenario do not have the legal standing of participants to the community of kashrut observers because they themselves do not observe kashrut. They're not legally considered to be participants to that community. Therefore, they do not have the standing of someone who can be trusted, who's ne'eman, with regard to the determination of the kashrut of a given item. We want to know if an item is kosher. We need to ask a person who's a participant to the community. They need to have legal standing in order to be trusted. Because these persons are not participants, they are on the outside, and thus they cannot be trusted. And thus, if I ask them if the food is kosher and they tell me it is kosher, they say, "Yes, Dad, I promise I wouldn't serve you non-kosher food. Who do you think? What do you think I would do that to you?" And the father still says, "Look, I know I love you. You love me. I know you wouldn't want to hurt me, but I know you're eating pig all the time, and you're out with your friends, and you're in the Communist Party. I assume they have parties too, and you go out to the parties, and you're eating the shrimp and whatever else that they have in early Soviet Russia. And how can I possibly trust you? You're on the outside of the community of kashrut observers." And then on the other hand, so that's the one side that's giving us this problem that we have these formalistic legal categories, and the father is having trouble working himself around them. This is, look, bottom line, I'm running into this brick wall. And on the other hand, he needs to eat. What's he going to do? And he needs meat. It's not healthy. And two, this is a question about his relationship with his children, who he loves. And he doesn't want to hurt that relationship. It's probably already fairly strained, given he's a very traditional Jew, and he's attached to the old time halakha and still wants to keep kosher, and his children are doing all kinds of different things. That's already very hard, but he doesn't want it to get any worse, and the children don't want it to get any worse. And Ramosha is seeing the situation and says, we need to figure something out here. There's got to be some way that we can get these porcupines a little closer together. So here's what he does. We'll go back just very briefly, actually, right? I'm going to show you. I said, I'm going to keep saying that the halakha always makes this two-step move, this like oscillating rhythm. There's the initial imposition of the categories, the formal categories, the clear in and out, and then the attempt to sort of draw it back and make it a little more softer and fluid. So in the Shulchan Aruch, there's a lot of literature behind this, but just getting the bottom line. In the Shulchan Aruch version, he just says, is the main compendium of Jewish law in the late Middle Ages. It becomes authoritative. So he says, somebody who themselves is suspect, they're suspect with regard to eating prohibited things. It doesn't matter whether it's a serious high-level prohibition or low-level prohibition. You cannot trust them if they tell you that food is kosher. And if you are lodging with them, you're staying at their house, you're not allowed to eat things from his pantry. If it's the sort of thing you know that he's not careful about making sure the meat's kosher, you can't eat the meat. You know he's not careful about this or that. You can't trust him about this or that. The Ramaz, the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century. So he says, 17th century. He says, actually, even somebody who isn't positively suspected, meaning you have actual evidence that he has violated this law. Rather, even just somebody who you don't have positive corroboration, that you don't know positively that they keep kosher. And you can't buy wine from them. Anything where there's a possibility of thing going wrong, you certainly can't buy things from them where there's a profit motive. And so this is the background for what becomes the modern hashgacha industry. Whereas in the past, it used to be much more simple. The hashgacha used to mean, if you're living in a shtetl and there's one shopkeeper and there's one shochet. So hashgacha just means that the rabbi knows the shochet and knows the shopkeeper, and the rabbi says it's fine. But once you have modern industrial food production and you're living in metropolitan areas where not everybody knows every shopkeeper, so that's when you start getting the need for kashrus agencies, and then they have a corresponding need for much, much more comprehensive stringency. It's a really interesting dynamic. Anyway, but then the Rama says, if you're staying with somebody and you're not sure that you haven't seen them eat non-kosher food, but you're not sure, but you don't have positive evidence, he says you are allowed to eat with them. This is already the first stage of like a little bit of softening. He says, look, if you know that he doesn't keep kosher, that's one thing. if you just don't know one way or the other, and you're staying in his house, which means A, you're dependent on him for food. It might be hard to get takeout. And also you'll offend him if you say you're not going to eat. That's a real problem. Already the Rama says at that point, as long as you don't know for certain that he keeps non-kosher, you can say, all right, you eat whatever he's serving. And it sounds like you don't need to ask too many questions. Really interesting. Later on in this passage of the Shulchan Aruch, so there's Mishu Mufursam Bechad Mavirut, which is just important background, which we'll get to later, not tonight, in future weeks. So somebody who is well known for violating any major sin. Except with the exception of idolatry or public Sabbath desecration, Chilul Shabbat for Hesia, those are the major ones which sort of count you, those rule you out of the community entirely for all purposes. We'll look at a little bit of the implications of that. Somebody who denies the authority of the sages. So Neman Bishar Yisurim. So as long as they only violate their transgressiveness is specific to an individual law. There's just one thing. They just shatnez. So they mix wool and linen. It's just for whatever reason they really like their wool and linen coat. Everybody knows they really like their wool and linen coat, so they wear it all the time. So that means that you can't trust them about shatnez matters, but you can trust them about anything else. It's just shatnez he's got a problem with, but I can ask him if the food's kosher. So Neman Bishar Yisrael, he's believed about other things. Vishel Acherim, and when it comes to other people's stuff, Afilu al Ozar Davar, even about that very thing, Lomar Motahu. So he can say that somebody else's coat is not shatnez and wearable. It's just like with regard to his own stuff that is problematic. And then the Rama adds, Bishu chashud b'davar de lo mashmele in shishu avera. This is just a really important, just like basic plank of flexibility and fluidity that gets introduced into the system. The Rama says there's a kind of a kind of compassionate, loving, or just I think just understanding posture that we can take in these scenarios. He says if it's a davar de lo mashmele in shishu avera. So yes, you know that this person is violating a law. They're committing an avera, but you also know that most people don't think this is an avera. So it's like, some kind of food where you're not allowed to eat it. You know that they should know they're not allowed to eat it, but everyone in this community thinks it's fine. So in that case, lo mikri chashud, you can't count them. You can't consider them to be suspect, because they don't think they're committing a transgression. As far as they're concerned, they're doing everything right. And so the fact that you know that they're doing something wrong does not indicate anything about their overall trustworthiness and their standing in the community of Halakhic or kosher observers. It does say milot davar for that specific thing that they don't know about. They can't be trusted because they just don't know about it. But in general, we need to ask. It's not enough to say on the surface that, well, they're violating this or that. I need to know, why are they violating it? I can start asking questions, and then I might be able to construct a kind of generosity and compassion. I might be able to construct a story that says that, yes, they're engaging in a technical violation, but this doesn't say anything about who they are, who they want to be, and what community they want to be a part of. And so we'll see later on in a few weeks. So they especially in modernity, but already in the Middle Ages, the incredibly powerful trajectories this line of thinking takes. And that was just sort of on the sides. You see, even within this one section in the Shulchan Aruch, you get, on the one hand, the very strong, very clear, if you violate the law, you're out. And then an attempt to introduce some fluidity on account of a kind of genuine relationship. Now, the last piece before we get back to Moshe Feinstein is a passage in the Talmud in Masechet Ketubot, Pei, page 85. And again, you have it here in translation. I don't know if we'll read the whole passage, but let me skip around a bit. But here's the story. Totally, the topic itself is totally unrelated to what we're doing, but there's a principle that comes out of it. So Hayi Itza, there's a woman, who is obligated to take an oath in Rava, the rabbis, Rava's court. He's a great sage. Amrle bat Rav Chisda, his wife, who is the Rav Chisda's daughter, says to Rava, Yadana ba dechashuda ashua. This woman who you're about to forswear and have her take an oath in your court, I happen to know, I know this person, and this person is not trustworthy. You can't have her make an oath. The rule is if somebody has a history of lying, they've committed perjury in the past, or they're just generally not trustworthy, you can't have them make an oath, because the Chazal think that taking an oath with invoking God's name with falsehood is not just a sin, but a threat to the cosmic order. Everything could fall apart. It's like deeply dangerous to allow someone to or certainly to facilitate somebody taking a false oath. So Bas Rav Chisda says, no, you can't let her do this. And so what Rava does is say, well, so she was going to take an oath that says, I don't owe this guy money. And instead, Rava says, okay, well, then the other party is going to take an oath that says that you do owe him money, and then he's going to be able to collect. So he dramatically changes the outcome of the case, and she loses on account of this. Okay, then there was this another time. I'm going to go through this quickly. Just sort of translate it on the fly. Rav Papa and Rav Ada Bar Masna are sitting there, and they got a loan document that came into the court, and they were evaluating it. Rav Papa says, Yadanabe Dishtara Priyahu. I happen to know that this loan document it says that Reuven owes Shimon money, but I know that Reuven already paid the debt. So the document should be thrown out. It should be torn up because Reuven already paid it. Amarle, and he says, Ika inish achrina bahade demar, is there another person with you? By which he means the standard for establishing any fact in a traditional halakhic court is you require two witnesses testifying to any given fact. And here it's just Rav Papa. He's just one guy. He's a very important guy. He's a learned person, and he's somebody the court knows, but he's just one person, and you need two witnesses in order to corroborate anything. And he says, Amrle lo. He says, no, I don't have another witness. And so Amrle afagav de ikamar is like, Rav Papa, you're great, you're amazing. Nothing personal, but a single witness is meaningless, so I can't trust you. I have to accept this document at face value. Amrle Rav Ada Bar Masna, Rav Papa bat Rav Chisda. But then he says, the other friend says, hold on. You trusted the daughter of Rav Chisda when she told you that this woman wasn't trustworthy, and yet you don't trust Rav Papa. Rav Papa's a great sage. But Rav Chisda kimle begave, he says, I know her. I know her well. Marlo kimle begave, I don't know you as well. Okay, we'll leave it there. I think you're remembering correctly, he's married to her. So he really knows her well. He has a deep personal relationship with her. And so it's not just so again, we're faced with this tension where on the one hand, the formal legal categories say, the law says, you press the button and you get the algorithm churns out the answer mechanically. So the answer here is you need two witnesses if you want to corroborate anything in court. And yet, when it's a matter of Rav Chisda's daughter telling him a certain fact, he says, that I can trust. I don't need two witnesses now. And the reason is because he really, really knows her. Something about that makes a difference in that case, where he can use that fact and rely on his deep personal relationship, connection, and knowledge of this person for a legal purpose where we would otherwise require the formal legal category. And then even though the formal legal requirement is not met, we can still get what we need to get. That's not going to be, it's not guaranteed. It requires a certain depth of relationship. Okay, so now back to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Here's what he says. So again, remember the story is fathers, they're elderly, they're reliant on their atheist communist children for their daily sustenance. All they want is a good steak, hamburger, chicken soup to get healthy again, just to stay healthy. And they have nowhere to go other than to trust their daughter's cooking. So Moshe says, I came up with this idea. I actually think there's a way to be lenient and make an allowance in many of these cases. If the father knows and he's confident, gavad bito, with regard to his daughter, bikalato, or his daughter-in-law, whatever it is, shelo yakshiluhu bi'isur, that she would never cause him to entrap him with non-kosher food. Why wouldn't she do this? It's not because she cares about kashrut. Mishum de makir tiva, because he knows her character, makir tiva, he knows her nature. B'yediya brura, and he knows it with clear knowledge. He says, he's tested her many times. He tried, I don't know what the test is. He says, he makes sure, where did you buy the food? Which shochet did you get it from? How is he doing today? How's his wife doing? Which pot did you use? What was the last thing you used that pot for? Whatever it is, he's in some way to make sure that she knows what she's doing and that she's and that she's committed to this. And he sees that she's doing it right, that she's not going to feed him anything he's not supposed to eat. And why is she doing this? Not because she cares about kashrut. She doesn't want to cause him pain. She cares, she loves her father and doesn't want to hurt him. Because if he found out he ate non-kosher food, or even thought it was possible, it would break his heart. And she doesn't want to break her father's heart. Or her character is that she would simply never, it's just a matter of interpersonal respect. She would never want to deceive anybody. She's just an honest person. So even leaving out the depth of the father-daughter relationship, just as a matter of interpersonal integrity and respect, she's the kind of person who wouldn't lie. And so if she says it's kosher, it's kosher. You can trust her. Anytime she says the food is kosher, and she says, I cooked it for you in the right pots, and I made everything for you in the right way, you can trust her. Mishum, this is the key line. So it's a little tricky to translate. So this is not a matter of nemanut, trustworthiness. Trust. This is not a matter of trust, where trust means, nemanut means legal, formalistic legal standing to have one's word accepted in court. That's nemanut. Means you belong to the right class of person, and because you belong to the right class of person, your claim on a certain question is therefore acceptable. He says, we're not making that up. We're not asking whether the daughter belongs to the right legal class. Ella, rather, what we're doing is, it's a matter of yediyah atzmit. It's a matter of personal, direct knowledge. Shehu kiriyamash, as if the father saw that the food, he saw her buy the kosher food, and he saw her make the kosher food with his own eyes. Even though he was in the other room, he didn't see any of it. But it's because he knows she wouldn't lie to her, either because she loves him and wouldn't want to break his heart, or because she's just a good and honest person. He knows, as if he saw with his own eyes, that this food is kosher. And because he knows that, he can go ahead and eat the food without compunction, despite the fact that, as a matter of the formalistic legal calculus, his daughter does not qualify for nemanut. This is just as an opening foray. I think it's just an incredible little episode in history of halakha, I think, with really powerful, far-reaching implications, where we can generate a kind of problem and a kind of conflict. And we should generate these kinds of conflicts and problems because we need to have clear standards. And most of the time, there's nothing wrong with having these kind with impersonal, institutionally mediated relationships with other people. That's how most of our relationships with other human beings go. You walk into the grocery store, you don't have a personal friendship with the checkout person. You have there's a set of institutional, formal, legal expectations for how the interaction is supposed to go. You hand them the money, they hand you the groceries, and everyone knows the patterns, and it's all just sort of there. But you don't know anything about the person, they don't know anything about you. You don't have to like each other, you can hate each other. It makes no difference. And that's the majority of our relationships. And even when we're within our tight-knit communities, again, this is often just going to be the case. We don't have the time, we don't have the emotional capacity just to literally, we just simply cannot engage in what Martin Buber's phrase with an I thou rather than an I it relationship with every single person 100% of the time. You need to be able to just take stuff for granted. You need to be able to just walk into a room and say, I trust this person for this thing, or I don't trust that person for that thing. And you can't sit down and spend years developing a relationship with them to see whether or not you trust them. You just have to make the call one way or the other. And even with Rav and Rav Papa, he says, Rav Papa, I've known you for years. You've been learning with me, but we just don't, it happens to me, we don't have that kind of relationship. And I'm not going to set things up such that I'm making those kinds of calls where I'm saying, I'm going to trust you, I'm not going to trust you because I have a close relationship. It's too complicated, it's too messy most of the time. But what Rav Moshe shows us is that at the very least, there will be cases, these will be cases when it's within our families, where on the one hand, the exigency is so much higher. It's just so much more pressing. Here, you can't just say, look, honey, I'm sorry, you belong to the wrong legal class, and so you don't have formal namanut, and so I can't eat your food. Because when you're relating to your daughter, you're not just relating to another person who's a part of the broader social mechanism. You're relating to her. And then, as for the reasons Russia describes, like, you're gonna be living in this house every day, you need to eat, and you need to be able to find a way to carry on a life together. So the legal formalism is not going to do it. And so there's the possibility where Moshe reintroduces, on the one hand, we want to honor, we take this seriously. There's a real problem here. We're not just going to say, well, whatever, it's a free for all, it's your daughter, so just eat whatever she serves. We're not saying that either. But we are saying we want to open up this possibility, we want to push towards the possibility of cultivating a kind of relationship of genuine personal trust with her. And it's going to be hard and easy, and it's going to be this complex give and take. But he uses the language of testing. There's going to be back and forth, and you're going to see if you can make this relationship work around this point. You're going to try a little gamut. She's going to try a little gamut. She's going to push you a little bit. You're going to push her, and you're going to see if you can make this work. And the vision of success is where you've achieved genuine trust, and then you don't need to ask questions anymore because you know the idea that she would never lie to you. She would never want to break your heart. But then I think you have those kinds of cases where both the exigency and the opportunity for this kind of directly personal relationship and form of trust. And then a kind of inclusion that comes from that, which here the inclusion is that they're able to eat together every day, and therefore they're able to live together. But I think I at least just want to raise the possibility, sketch the idea, the vision, that as we think about navigating challenges within our broader Jewish communities, within our neighborhoods, within our nations, even on the geopolitical level. Our focus is gonna be on the first order Halakhic principles, which is gonna be about the Halakhic community. I think this is as I started with, this is a universal human problem and challenge with that calls for, I think, a kind of universal human approach. I think everywhere where we rely on formal institutional mechanisms for getting by, every time we do that, there's the possibility of not just exclusion, but unjust exclusion and violence. I don't want to go over time, but very briefly, I had a case last year in our Hillel here at Yale. It was a guy reached out to me. He already the email was a little funny. It seemed a little off, but he just said, "Hi, I'm here in town, going to a local college, not Yale, and I'm around, and I would love to be a part of the Jewish community. Can you help me out?" And so something was a little odd about the formulation. I sent it around to some of my colleagues, just said, "Do you see anything?" And we looked him up online, as you do nowadays, and we found a few social media postings and a couple of videos that were a little deranged and very, very odd. There was some stuff about demons, and there was some hint in one of them that even point towards the possibility of violence. And I sent it around, and it got registered within the institutional structure as this is a possible security threat. It happened to be this person followed up with me, and I said, why don't we meet? You're not going to come into the Hill because they're worried. I didn't say this out loud, but let's go meet at a coffee shop. And I sit down with the guy. He's an incredible person, extremely sweet, super interesting story. And he tells me part of the story is that he was in the Marines and he suffered a traumatic brain injury. And there was a short time where he had a few manic episodes, and he did some stuff that was really weird. I told him about the stuff online. He was horrified. He didn't know it was there, and he went up and immediately took it down. But it was there, and he said he's getting treatment. And be happy. You can tell me who the psychiatrist is at the VA. And I went up talking to his mother, and I'm talking to this guy. I am now personally confident that this person is fine. And then I'm happy to have this person in my institution. I also knew he'd been at the Chabad, so like nothing had gone wrong. I'm like, I'm comfortable inviting this guy in to our Shabbat dinner at the Hillel. But the problem was that I had already raised the red flag. Maybe there's something problematic. It had already been registered in the security protocols. And there was no way the fact that Alex met with this guy for 40 minutes in the Starbucks was going to be good enough. And we had no possible institutional process for verifying that this guy was safe, given that we'd already raised a red flag. And at the end, there was just nothing we could do institutionally to say that we can allow this guy in our building. As that was I found it to be deeply tragic and just incredibly difficult. And the redemptive trajectory I want to point to, and I told that story to make clear just how difficult and hard it can be. But the redemptive trajectory is to figure out how to make our institutional lives, and this will include directly as we study our Halakhic institutional lives. Halacha is a formal institution with authority structures and clear boundaries. How do we make those structures as loving and inclusive as possible? And what that means in the first place, where I want to start, is how can we include how can we build in the work of directly personal relationship, of meeting people at Starbucks and getting to know them, rather than treating them as mere instances of a type. But this is, as I've tried to stress, this will be an eternal challenge, and will always be moving back and forth in ongoing rhythm. That's my spiel for tonight. You were free to go before, but you're certainly free to go now. I see there's a comment here in the chat. But as a threat is less about security safety, more about challenging institutional culture or established interpretations. Awesome. Lindsay's got all the good questions tonight. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll get maybe next week into cases where sort of like the case we were dealing with tonight. So here tonight is the woman simply just doesn't keep kosher, and so it's a question of whether you can trust she can participate in the community of kosher observers. But what if you have somebody whose either their views or their practices are not just something they do on their own time in their own space, but are actively challenging and subverting the communal structures overall. So that's going to be the hardest case to include. And so there, the question will be like, can there be some way to either interpret what they're doing through more charity and generosity, or to bring them to say, well, you're going to do your thing But can we find some way for you to do your thing such that it's compatible with us having a community that is not subverted actively? But we'll work through all that. Okay. I assume there's some way to get my email in general.
Oh yeah, sure. I can make a note to try and send that out. And I'm sorry, I'm just checking if there are any questions on Facebook, which there are not. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Rabbi Ozar, for sharing your Torah with us.
Thank you.
I'll Registration for Spring Zman classes is open at 5784.drisha.org/spring. Many classes are starting this week, including Halacha for the Ages, Reading Responsive from a Bygone Era with Dr. Rachel First, Torah and Technology, Ancient Wisdom for a Digital Age with Rabbi Daniel Nevins, and a special guest appearance by Rabbi Silber at Mishnah in Depth this Tuesday, as well as many exciting upcoming classes. So please check those out on our website. Thank you so much for joining us once again, and we'll see you all next week. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.